The Seattle Seahawks last year in 2020 had one of the weirder seasons that they've had in the past few years. On one hand, they had a really great, incredible start to the season offensively, led by Russell Wilson, who started with, I believe, 19 touchdowns to just 3 interceptions in his first 5 weeks of play. However, the second part of the season, those last 11 games of the season, were not so kind to Russell Wilson. He had a couple games where he had 2+ turnovers. He had a game against Arizona that they lost where he had 3 interceptions. And he even though he still played at a Pro Bowl level for the second half of the season, or last 11 games of the season, really, he definitely took a step down from where he was at the beginning of the year, and really a lot of that has to do with the fact that they finally went against some better defenses in that last 11 games. Now, statistically speaking, the Seattle Seahawks had a okay to slightly above average year in pretty much every statistical category. 8th in points, 9th in turnovers, 12th in rushing offense, and 16th in passing offense. The thing that ended up really holding this team back was the fact that they allowed the 5th most sacks in the entire NFL last year. I believe it was 47 for the entire season. So, I mean, that's 3 times for sure a game, basically, that Russell Wilson is getting planted on his back for a sack. That's not counting any of the plays where he still got hit and drilled to the ground. That's not including any plays where he gets flushed out of the pocket and gets tackled after a gain. So, I mean, there is an obvious wear and tear factor on Russell Wilson going into this year based off not just last year's struggles by the offensive line, but the growing problem that the offensive line has been for the past few seasons. The biggest change offensively going from last year to this year is changing Brian Schottenheimer for Shane Waldron at that offensive coordinator position. Shane Waldron, if you don't know, was the passing game coordinator for the Los Angeles Rams the past few years. He was the quarterback's coach with Jared Goff. And he helped Jared Goff ascend to a level that, comparing it to his rookie year, we never really thought Jared Goff could get to that level. And I think Shane Waldron, along with Shane McVay down there in LA, are probably the biggest reasons for Jared Goff taking that leap. Jared Goff became a consistent top 10 to 15 quarterback throughout his 3 years with Shane Waldron down there in LA. And if he's able to take someone like Jared Goff, who, like I said, at the beginning of his career, we really were looking at him as the next number 1 overall bust to be drafted to the LA Rams. That's kind of the mood that was around Jared Goff at the time. And they made him a Pro Bowl quarterback. They made him a Super Bowl quarterback. They made him a guy who could lead a really good team to the playoffs and win a playoff game. And so, I mean, if Shane Waldron was able to do that as the passing game coordinator for the Rams with Jared Goff, just imagine what he could be doing with Russell Wilson. And really, other than Shane Waldron, there's not a lot of other moves offensively adding to this team. They drafted Dwayne Eskridge in the second round out of Western Michigan. Even though they already have DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, Freddie Swain, they have a lot of wide receivers already, so I don't necessarily agree with the move there. Especially seeing as they only had 3 draft picks all draft. Using it on a position that is not a position of need, when you need defensive linemen, you need offensive linemen, you need defensive backs. Dwayne Eskridge, I'm sure he'll be a good player, but it's just not a fit. They signed tight end Gerald Everett from the Los Angeles Rams, who again played under Shane Waldron, who was the passing game coordinator for the Rams. So there will be a level of continuity between Waldron and Everett going to this offense. On a pure player personnel level, offensively, the Seattle Seahawks ended up losing a lot more than they actually added. They lost 2 good receivers in David Moore and Philip Dorsett. Moore went to Carolina, Dorsett went to Jacksonville. They lost Jacob Hollister to Buffalo, and Carlos Hyde ended up signing in Jacksonville as well. Now, the side of the ball that actually scares me about the Seattle Seahawks, and I don't mean scares me in terms of, like, they look good. This team scares me because defensively they look poor, to say the best. They were 15th in points allowed, 22nd in yards allowed, 16th in takeaways, 31st in pass defense. They were 5th in run defense, and they were 7th in sacks. So at least on one hand, they do have a couple things that they are able to say that they do well. And in an effort to try to keep the run defense and sack numbers up from last year, the Seattle Seahawks ended up signing Kerry Hyder and Aldon Smith to play defensive end. Hyder came from San Francisco. Aldon Smith came from Dallas. They also signed defensive tackle Al Woods, who will be able to help inside. Now, if I'm a Seahawks fan, looking at who is gone from last year on the defensive side of the ball is really what scares me. They lost Quentin Dunbar to Detroit, who had legal issues all year. Not all year, but he had legal issues going into the year last year. He wasn't really a top guy for them, but would always make a splash play here and there for the Seahawks. They ended up losing the Griffin brothers, who were pretty much a fan favorite for not only Seahawks fans, but they were just a good story around the NFL in general. Shaquille Griffin went to Jacksonville. I think Shaquem went to Miami? I'm not exactly sure where Shaquem went, but moral of the story is he's not on the team anymore. Neither is Shaquille Griffin. We don't know about KJ Wright right now. It's really weird with KJ Wright because he obviously was probably one of the better linebackers that was going to hit free agency this year. And the fact that he's not signed, I think it almost, I wouldn't rule out that he would sign elsewhere, but just the fact that it's this late, I would almost guarantee he's going to come back to Seattle or, if anything, just retire. But at the end of the day, we just don't know about KJ Wright, and that's kind of a scary thing as well because he's really one of the few guys defensively that they could count on every given snap. And the last guy to talk about when you look at what they lost from the free agency this year is Jaron Reed. I don't understand letting Jared Reed go. And not only do they let him go, he goes to Kansas City, where they already have Chris Jones. So thanks, Kansas City. You didn't need to do that, but now you have it, and you're going to terrorize offensive linemen with it. So thank you. But Jaron Reed leaving the Seattle Seahawks, I understand they still have Poona Ford, who is a good defensive tackle in his own right. But Jaron Reed was something different, man. Jaron Reed was a really good player at that defensive tackle spot and just defensive line spot in general. Letting him go is a really big mistake. So last year, the Seattle Seahawks went 12-4. They won the NFC West. They ended up losing in the wild card game to the LA Rams at home when Jared Goff didn't even start the game. It was that one, I forget the other dude's name. But moral of the story is they lose the game at home to Jared Goff with a broken thumb, 20-30. I mean, there were obvious issues throughout the game that presented themselves. They didn't have an ability to pass block. They didn't have an ability to run the ball very efficiently. They didn't have the ability to stop the other team from scoring. Even Jared Goff with a broken thumb was doing really whatever he wanted to that Seattle defense. And with what they lost on the defensive side of the ball and the fact that they did not add anything to the defensive back room, they didn't add anything linebacker-wise. They're, if anything, going to lose their second-best linebacker if they're just not smart about this. The defense is probably going to look as bad, if not worse, next year. I really see that happening. Offensively, they're going to take a little bit of a step up. I think they're going to be a top 10 passing team. With that, they'll probably be a top 10 run offense team. Hopefully, with the introduction of more short and intermediate passing, the Seattle Seahawks will be able to get that sack number down from fifth most to maybe, they're in the top half of the league in terms of not allowing sacks. I'd honestly say points-wise, this team is going to be a top 5 scoring team. They're probably going to be a top 5 team when it comes to limiting turnovers. It might look bad early, but I'm sure they'll go on a run where they're not throwing interceptions, where they're not fumbling the ball. Offensively is where this team is really going to carry itself. And with that being said, I see this team going somewhere from 10-7 to 12-5, around the same kind of win total from last year, obviously with a 17-game season, and kind of being in the same position they were last year. They're not going to be a Super Bowl threat, at least I don't think so, just because of that defense. But they're still going to be someone who is going to make noise in the playoffs, win at least. If they're playing in the wild card round, they're going to at least win the wild card, maybe even get all the way to the conference championship. But they're not going to be a Super Bowl threat. Like I said, 10-7 to 12-5 is where I see them. And they're just going to do what they've done for the past decade, and that's be a really good team. With all that being said, that's going to be the video for me. I hope you all enjoyed it. If you did, make sure you leave a like. If you didn't, make sure you leave a dislike. Any feedback at this point is much appreciated. If you are a fan of what I'm doing, or if you're not, hit subscribe, even if you hate me. That'd be really appreciated. If you have something to say, leave a comment, and I'll try to respond to it. And I'll see you in the next video. Peace.